you've got about 500 people in this state that are determining things like policy positions inside the party, who the candidate for an election is, who holds the various office-bearing positions and therefore votes in upper house pre-selections. There's a lot of power that can be in the hands of a small number of people that are prepared to do the yards. Politics is for those who show up.
Hey, I'm Cody Mitchell and welcome to the Daily Declaration podcast. Today I was joined by Senator Alex Antic. Senator Antic is a South Australian Liberal senator. He's been very vocal on a range of issues in support of issues around freedom, faith, family and life. And he's also been outspoken on issues related to democratic participation. So I wanted to get him on to have a chat about how we can better engage with the political process and issues around that. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Senator Antic, thanks for joining me today.
Cody, thanks for having me. It's great to be here, and thanks for all the great work you guys are doing over at the Canberra Declaration. It's really, really good stuff to watch from afar, and it's just good to get the message out there. And there's lots of angles to politics, and these sorts of forums are really important now. So well done.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate your time in coming on. Just to kick us off, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, particularly like pre-political background.
Yeah, well, it's I don't think it's a particularly interesting story, so I hope I don't bore anyone. But it's I think probably an increasingly rare politics story in the sense that I spent 20 years in the private sector. I was a corporate lawyer. I'm born and bred in Adelaide my entire life. Locally schooled and locally educated through Adelaide University. I studied history and politics first up through an arts degree and managed to navigate through the heavily left-wing academia there, which wasn't quite so bad in the mid-90s. Drifted off into studying law and then went into the private sector and practiced commercial law and ended up doing wills and estates law, succession, and some disputes that arise out of that. So, one of those funny things where politics has always been hunting around in the background there. I think I talk to a lot of people who say this, that I always thought I might step into politics. And, one of my great passions in life is trying to help people who do that, who are doing it for the right reasons, to help them along, because it's not an easy path to navigate sometimes. And I think sometimes from the outside, politics looks more big and bad and scary than it really should be, or it is. So getting people that have got some life experience into politics, I think, is really important. I feel very strongly that although there are lots of good people that come through political offices into politics, that we really do miss out if we don't have enough people from different spheres. Also because I think it gives people an opportunity to have something to fall back on if politics doesn't go their way, and we need people to speak without fear or favour. This sort of increasing professionalisation of the political sphere, I think, is a bad thing. And so I'm hoping there'll be more people like me that have, got another career and want to have an opportunity to serve in Parliament, but who can speak because, without fear of, losing their only profession, it being politics, because there's something else to fall back on. So I think those things are becoming really, really important in politics, and I'm doing my best to try and help guide others through. And that means, bringing people into the political machine, trying to help, trying to educate, and trying to, give people a bit of hope, I suppose, that it's achievable. Because I'm certainly proof positive that it's achievable. If I can do it, anyone can.
That's a really good point you raised there about kind of people feeling like they have to toe the line, because their only career option is politics. And you sort of alluded to it there, but I was going to ask you about whether you'd always sort of had a desire to enter politics, or was that just something that sort of was an option, I guess?
Yeah, I think I talk to a lot of people who say the same thing, and that is I've always thought maybe I might get to that. And of course, people have other things to do in life. They're running businesses and they're raising families and they're, interacting with community groups. And I think in many ways that's taken people away from some of the things that they used to consider, like, being involved in politics or even being involved in church groups or community groups or whatever it is. And we've lost a bit of that, I think, with this pursuit of careers and whatever else, and that's all good stuff. But I think having left and vacated that field in a lot of instances, people who perhaps share our values have vacated the field of politics, and it's too easy a vacuum for the left to fill, and we see that throughout the society now. I think the left's long march through the institutions is well and truly underway, if not halfway there, if not finished. And we need to get people who share these values back into politics, back into the community. It might be a whole host of other things as well. It might be local AMA, the medical association, might be if you're a doctor, it might be the Law Society if you're a lawyer, it might be your local government, and just get people who share common sense values, who sort of respect our Judeo-Christian heritage and want to prosecute those principles back into the field and try and make it as easy for them as we can to do that. So, I do feel very strongly about that, and I think, this sort of cookie cutter approach to politics has got to, there's got to be some room for some individual flair and to protect, what served us very well over the generations, which are these principles and these core values.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really good. And I guess we'll get to cover a few of the things that you alluded to there. But before I do, I can't help but take the opportunity while talking to you to ask you about kind of your little famous moment of asking the health department leaders about what a woman is.
Yeah.
Why do you think that the trans issue is so important for us to get right?
Well, I mean, I just think we've got to tell the truth. In everything we do, we've got to tell the truth. And it's such a simple question. What is a woman? It wasn't something I came up with. It was something that I'd heard about in other jurisdictions. And in fact, I think it was Rita Panahi from Sky News, I heard, I think on a podcast, say before the election, this is a question that everyone should be asking every single candidate for election. And it really resonated with me. I thought, that's actually right. If we can't get this question right, then how are we going to go on the other stuff? And so I thought, well, we'll ask a few of the departments this to see how far this radical gender theory had crept into the bureaucracy, because we knew it was there. And it was a bit unfortunate in the sense that when asked that question, Professor Brendan Murphy kind of stumbled. But the feeling I get is that he wanted to answer it in the sensible way, which was an adult human female, or whatever the similar way of doing it. If you're a woman, you're born a woman, those sorts of themes. But I just get the impression that, he was almost looking over his shoulder at the departmental, staff who would have set upon him there and outside the room later on, and so, I think these things are critical because they do speak to, the truth of it. And the truth is, if we can't sort of cover off, particularly when you're the Department of Health, which is making important health and kind of sort of pretty serious, decisions about healthcare and, funding and all these sorts of things, it really does highlight the point. So, it was a bit of a moment in time there, but I think we have to do that in order to get the message across to people. Some of these bureaucracies are so, pushing their own agenda away from the spotlight of the community that I think sometimes you need to almost make that scene in order to show people, get something that shows it so carefully. And it may seem like nothing, but my fear is that what we are seeing is this increasing attack on the family unit, the nuclear family, this sort of blurring of lines with gender ideology. And, it's not helpful. We want this out of our schools. We want it out of our bureaucracies. And I think this is one of the effective ways someone like me can try and combat it.
Absolutely. No, it was a pretty confronting display of where things are at in some of those institutions, and it could probably be argued that things have got to that place because people haven't been as engaged as they possibly could. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, look, I totally agree with that. And I think it highlights the point. In many respects, in the bubble that is Canberra and the bureaucracy over there, that probably wouldn't be seen as being a controversial question. But out in the real world, if I was to scream out the window here or throw a dart out the window and hit someone, they would think it was laughable. And it highlighted for me how there's a massive disconnect from sort of the ruling class, the elite, even the elite bureaucracy and the elite professional political class sometimes, and people out there. I mean, politicians across the sphere, and they love to cuddle dogs and cuddle babies, but it's not really what it's about in terms of being relatable. It's being able to understand what people are really worried about. When I talk to people, when I'm sort of talking to people that I know and friends and family and constituents and whatever it is, they tell me things like, I'm worried about what my kids are being taught in schools. They talk to me about the price of cost of living. We don't see that out of the Labor government at the moment. When they get the reins over there, all we're getting is federal ICAC, the Voice, and a whole raft of other things which really are, diversionary to what are the real issues. And that's the challenge. The challenge is, and I face it every day when I go into that building in Canberra. I say to myself, I actively say to myself as I'm going through the scanner, don't get caught up in the theatre of this place, because it really is a bit of a distraction. It's almost a dance in there. You start with this process, and then the Senate opens, and then there's this sort of theatre of motions and committees, and none of that makes a scrap of difference to people out there in the real world. So I think it's all about trying to get that message through. And we've got some real challenges coming in this country, and we've got to have people that are prepared to speak about them.
Absolutely. How do you read, I guess, the level of political engagement, democratic engagement in Australia at the moment? Do you think that that's something that has been increasing in recent times or decreasing? Are people becoming more disconnected?
I think they are. I think they're getting a bit more disillusioned with some of it. But I think there's a level of understanding and awareness and engagement that I haven't seen for a while. I do see people a bit more interested in the process. So, I was only reflecting on it this morning, actually, when we're in the middle of local government elections here in South Australia every 4 years, and there's a massive turnout from what I can see, particularly in the city of Adelaide, for the council elections. A lot of people standing, putting their hands up to run, and I suspect a lot of that is to do with the polarising nature of politics at the moment. There are conservative candidates, which is great, and then there are the kind of the climate change candidates, which is predictable as well. But there does appear to be a bit more interest in it from the political side of it and the election side of it. I think we're very polarised, and social media probably has a big hand in that. What I read would be completely different to what someone with a different set of political views reads. Whereas in years gone by, our news media would give you, maybe a slightly centre left or a slightly centre right approach or whatever it may be. So I get the feeling that is increasing people's interest in politics a little bit. But look, I think as a country, we've almost worn it like a badge of honour, this sort of, that's someone else's problem, but let them deal with it. And particularly so from, I think, the conservative side. And, I would call, the quiet Australians, just general people are basically, even if they don't really know it, most people are kind of a little bit conservative, even if they vote Labor sometimes. I think there's a conservative Labor side, of course, the old DLP style, but I think most Australians really do lean that way. And, I think that the more we can get them to understand what's going on, some of this stuff, they need to understand when they're voting Green what they're actually getting. And, I think this myth that it's environmentalism is the thing that's really damaging. And I think people are starting to wake up to that, but we've got a long way to go.
Oh, it's encouraging that things are starting to happen. I was reading just this morning about young people, and there are many levels at which young people are becoming more engaged in certain kinds of democratic participation, but they tend to be non-electoral forms of participation, whether they be petitions or boycotting things or gluing themselves to walls and vandalizing painting. But I guess what would you say to young people to maybe encourage them to be more involved at the level of electoral politics or voting?
Well, I mean, I think you're actually right. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is kids getting brainwashed through schools and universities and through social media. There's a lot of that, I think, and you are seeing people. The school strike for climate is the classic. I mean, what an ingenious way of getting kids out on the street, telling them you get them a day off school, and so the left have done it very well. Their messaging is very good. Their messaging through things like the marriage campaign was sublime. Who can argue with love is love? But of course, that was the Trojan horse. Didn't tell the full story. So, I think there are a whole heap of things. The conservative side of politics has got a long way to go in terms of its messaging and its catch-up. There is a bit of a cycle involved in that, and I'm hopeful that the kids, that sort of the kids that are coming out of school now, there will be a bit of a counterculture swing. They always say that, the kids will do the opposite of what their parents do, and if the parents are a bit woke, you might find the kids go the other way. Let's hope that's true. But at a party political level, I just think it's got to be, and we've got to be talking to kids with things they're actually interested in and telling them the truth of it. Because I think, once again, it feeds into that counterculture. So, there's nothing more, I think, helpful to kids than to hear that what they're hearing, on TikTok is actually wrong, and, finding a way to sort of summarize that message very quickly and in a very saleable sort of way, because, we can sit there and, talk for hours on end about why the message they're getting on, let's say, climate change is completely wrong. But you need to sort of settle it down a bit and make it a bit more accessible. So there's a long way to go with that. But look, I think just bringing people into the machine, the more young people that we can get inside, the Liberal Party with me here in SA, I'm actively encouraging younger people to sign up, to join, to sort of get involved, and I'm trying to help them as much as I can with that, when the hours of the day will permit, because, we need them. We need the younger generation. But it's like anything in life, you've got to give people some hope and a message that they can kind of relate to. And, it's a slow burn at the moment, because I think the schools and the universities are taking them in a different direction, unfortunately.
And I think education seems to have a fair bit to do with that, whether it be the university or schooling as well. Do you think that is kind of that there has been a bit of a failure to sort of educate and I guess share basics of civics and citizenship, voting, electoral systems, and that with young people?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of that tried for years on end. I think the thing that's really alarming is the general drift off in the curriculum. We're seeing reports now of Australia, despite defying the trend, I suppose, in Western nations of having some of the lowest standards in the education system, and that's a worry, because I'm concerned from what I'm hearing. My son's not school age yet, but from what I'm hearing from other parents, they're telling me that the curriculum is now full of advocacy. How can I be an advocate rather than how can I learn how to read and write? So it might be a particular left-wing cause or whatever it is, and I'm concerned that what we're going to get through is a generation of kids that aren't able to logically critique things and logically analyse issues, which, during my time in leaving school, probably, 30 odd years ago, might be more actually now I think about it, don't want to think about it, was still there. But the standards are dropping. And I guess, look, one thing that really would make a difference would be to tackle that issue. I think that's one of the, if not, the preeminent issue outside cost of living and the kind of the pressures we're getting there for this country, is to get that system right. Previous Minister Alan Tudge did a really good job fighting off the bureaucrats. You can't underestimate what a difficult job it is for someone to take on, the establishment or the education establishment. I mean, it is literally, one versus thousands. So, but we need more of a political impetus to do that now. We need to fix up the curriculum, and we need to make sure that kids are getting educated and not indoctrinated.
That's a really, really good point. I know a lot of people, when they think about democratic participation and getting involved, they kind of, I mean, you mentioned before, they're disillusioned. They think of the system as broken and that kind of thing. How would you respond to that? Do you think there are still, obviously real meaningful ways that we can get involved?
Yeah. Look, I really do, and I talk to people about it all the time. I mean, it is I suppose a difficult flowchart to explain, in detail. But I usually use the point that people cannot understand how, by being a member of a party, like, being involved with me here in South Australia with the Liberal Party, and how that one person can make such an enormous difference. I mean, we have around about 5,000 members here in South Australia, and the truth is not all that many show up to vote and put their hand up. I mean, I don't know exactly what the stats are, but if I'd said 10% of those, I'd probably be about on the money. So you've got about 500 people in this state that are determining things like policy positions inside the party, who the candidate for an election is, who holds the various office-bearing positions and therefore votes in upper house pre-selections. There's a lot of power that can be in the hands of a small number of people that are prepared to do the yards. Politics is for those who show up. And if you're the sort of person that joins and turns up and supports candidates that support your values, then you give the best opportunity you can to having somebody at an election, pre-selected for an election, and who might then go to Parliament. And it's a long-term proposition. It doesn't happen in 10 minutes. It takes a number of years, even a number of cycles, I suppose. But I say to people all the time, there's no point in whinging. If you're going to sit back on the computer and share stories with friends and send emails around, get on social media, and we need all of that. But if people really want to make a difference, then they need to understand that their one membership of a party like ours, joining me inside that movement, for example, is much more powerful than people can realise. I mean, I could give you, I wouldn't name them, but I could give you multiple examples of new people that have come on board, that have shared things with me, that have trickled all the way up to the top, and have in many cases become on the radar of party leadership. It is just how it works. Speaking to your local member is great, but speaking to them as a member of their party is a whole lot more powerful. And then, because you might then also get the opportunity to vote for them in a pre-selection, you can't underestimate this as a way of having your voice heard. So look, I say to people, don't be despondent, don't shout from the sidelines, get involved, and let's be part of the solution.
Absolutely. No, it's really good advice. I know for a lot of people, the idea of joining a party can seem quite intimidating, as can just being, I guess, an informed voter. What would you say to people who might be in that place?
Yeah, and look, I mean, it's no different really to going into a barbecue or a birthday party, when you don't know anyone or whatever. I think that's the value of having a community, and I'm sort of trying to help people to come in and get involved. And one of the things we're doing here in South Australia is having events that aren't actually necessarily AGMs or whatever. They're just listening to speakers. And so we've had some great speakers, some really high profile ones here for new members, to try and get them involved. It's like getting into a hot bath. I think sometimes you've got to kind of settle down. I mean, the truth of it actually is that there's nothing intimidating or frightening about grassroots political parties. I mean, they are really no different to a footy club or a whatever. But having people come in and feel comfortable, like they know people, and assimilating them into the machine is just a sort of a basic human thing. I mean, I can remember vividly when I walked in, I didn't know anyone, and I just started socializing, and I found people that were like-minded, but it took time. So hopefully what I can do is help people along with that process and make them feel warm and welcomed and like their voices are being heard. And there is a sense of common purpose doing that as well. We had last year we had former Prime Minister Tony Abbott came and spoke with a group of people that had just recently joined to try and explain how politics worked, and we filled the Norwood Town Hall with that, and we spoke a little bit, some Q&A, and I think it's showing people that politics is really approachable, and it's not anything that's special, and politicians are not special people. I can assure you of that. They're just regular people like all of us. So I would say to people, give it a go, and I'm happy to help.
That's really good. You mentioned earlier one of the things that you do a bit of is just sort of encouraging people who might be looking at maybe even running for whether it be local, state, federal government. What are some of the top pieces of advice that you would give to people who are considering something like that?
Yeah, and we need them too. I mean, I think this is the interesting bit about this is we've got obviously a need for people to support people who want to do that, but there's also a glaring need for the people who want to stand for these values. And I would say there's lots of opportunity out there for people who want to do that. I mean, the first thing is get involved. You need to find your lane, and you need to get involved, join, and the opportunities will arise. But I think understanding that it's this thing we talked about earlier about it's something that I think I might do at one point down the track. I think the mistake people make is thinking that you nominate for a pre-selection and then you're off to an election within a series of 2 months. I think human beings are what they are, and they like to know people. Quite rightly, they want to know who they're voting for in a party pre-selection. So my advice to people is just get involved. You've got nothing to lose, really. I mean, the membership fees are, they are what they are. But once you're in, people can get to know you, and then they can understand where your values come from, and I think starting the ball rolling. And look, for some people, they might think they want politics and be involved in politics, and then decide this isn't quite what I thought. But I think we've brought a heap of new people into the party just through this process. I think personally, I look at some of them and I think, that person's going to be the next member. They don't even know it yet because they're sort of buying into the process, and it's almost subconscious. You can see people getting a feel for what needs to be done and getting involved, and I can almost see it before they can sometimes. So that's really exciting as well. The one thing politics should be doing is trying to find people to make themselves redundant, and I'm very happy to do that. I can tell you, I just want to leave it in better shape than when I started, whenever that may be.
That's really, really helpful advice. We've talked a little bit about the sort of party side of things. Do you see any value, if any, I guess, in non-electoral forms of lobbying and engagement as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the thing that gets lost in some of this discussion. Sometimes I talk about it a lot, about being involved in party politics and how important that is. But I think what we're seeing in the community with some of these things like we talked about, like this radical gender theory that's crept in, is politics can fix a lot of things, but it can't fix everything. People need to be involved everywhere, So this point was actually made to me by a new member about a year ago, and this person said to me, this can't just be a political fix. It's got to be a fix which looks at all community. So that includes local government, but even off the political spectrum, again, it involves people being involved with their schools. We need people, I think, who are prepared to know what's going on at school board level, because I think part of the problem is sometimes parents don't know what's being taught. I heard an example the other week of a relief teacher here in SA who was teaching kids, as I understand it, about the value of communism, and how it had been a great ideology that just hadn't been done properly yet. And I mean, parents, I think having eyes on these subjects is so important, and that applies to schools. It might apply to your golf club. I mean, a lot of this stuff, I think the genesis of some of these movements starts elsewhere outside politics, and then politics picks it up. And, local government's a classic example of that. That seems to be a very easy entry point for the real hard left, who then prosecute these arguments at local government level. And we see that particularly through the inner city local governments. But the same is true at school level, in corporate areas. I mean, I know it's very hard for people, but having a say inside their corporate environment as well is pretty important too, because the corporate sector is absolutely appalling when it comes to these, ESG targets, they're called, environment, social and governance targets, which are basically code for pushing whatever the latest trendy issue is. People have got to have a presence everywhere, and there are a whole heap of examples I probably haven't thought of there as well. But it is not just a political issue; it's a whole of community issue, I think.
Absolutely, and that makes it in some ways easier for people who may not be quite as in tune with certain areas to they have a real passion for education or something, just to get involved with that.
Yeah, I think that's right, and you never know where it ends up. I mean, people start on one path and then it diverts into somewhere else, and you might end up doing something completely different. So, but it is that issue about just being involved and making sure we have a voice. And look, the other thing I say is often, not that I want to start fights around a dinner table by any stretch of the imagination, but I think some of the problem is that those of us that have these views, which I think is the majority, I think sometimes are too quiet about it in a social environment as well. That doesn't mean you have to engage, but I think it's a reasonable thing to do, to just simply talk through some of these things with people. And what do you mean when you say this? I mean, how can that be? Isn't it this? And I think that's helpful too. So we're very quiet. That's why we're called the quiet Australians.
Absolutely. No, it's really, really good points. Just before I let you go, where can people find you and follow the work that you do online?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I use Facebook still at the moment, Senator Alex Antic. Yeah, you'll see it there. And I also use our platform called Getter at the moment, but we're trying to branch out into a few others. The other thing people could do, which is really important, if they want to hear from me, I'm sending regular communications out through a mailing list, which they can find on my website, which is www.alexantic.com.au, and there's a link there to join up to that mailing list. And I'm sort of constantly communicating with e-news as we do. We try to do them every couple of weeks, and just to let people know what's going on and the sort of things that we're trying to do. And there's a lot to do at the moment. There's a lot to do, but not enough hours in the day, of course. But that's the whole purpose of this, is to try to make sure that we're promoting another generation of people to do this work, to lighten the load. We need a lot of hands on deck when it comes to protecting our values. But look, if they want to reach out, they can do that. If they want to, if you people out there that are interested in becoming members and they're from South Australia, my email address there is alex@believeinblue.com.au, alex@believeinblue.com.au. And look, if you're a South Australian and you want to get involved with this movement, then shoot me a message and I'll be happy to respond to you and tell you how you can do it. We'd love to have you on board.
I appreciate that. I haven't noticed too many politicians on TikTok as yet. I don't know why that is.
Well, the guys that are doing it here, they say I've got to be on TikTok, and I keep saying, you realise that is not something I'm going to do. It's and if you do, you'd want to have a separate phone. I think if you did that, you won't catch me on TikTok. There are a few though.
Yeah, right. I haven't stumbled upon any just yet. No, that's great. I appreciate the time that you've had, and all your thoughts, Senator Antic. It's been really helpful.
Thanks, Cody. And look, thanks again once again to you and the team there, everyone at Canberra Declaration, Kim and Warwick and everyone, and Kurt, the whole team. You do a great job and keep it up. So we appreciate it too.
Authorised by Warwick Marsh, 1A227 Cordo Road, Mount Kembla, New South Wales 2526.